from some conversations that I've had with a number of longstanding members of the AIHA in an effort to widen our net, cast out our net to some of our other organizations that exist beyond the realm of academia, non-traditional approaches to Italian-American studies. And one of the dynamic groups, of course, is the field of genealogy. So this panel seeks to acknowledge some of the really heartfelt and important work that's being done in the realm of family history and genealogy and how it pertains to the larger field of Italian-American studies. I'm interested in it for personal reasons. I'm a member of the Pittsburgh chapter of Pointers in Person, which is an Italian-American genealogical group that many of you are aware of. And I've noticed that in Pittsburgh, the genealogical societies like mine are taking off amongst younger generations of Italian-Americans, whereas the older mutual aid societies that have been around for 100 years are gradually dissipating and are not attracting new members. So I'm seeing that genealogy is a tool, an important tool to get younger people interested. It also pertains to my work in the museum field. I'm a curator and an archivist charged with building a collection of Italian-American resources in a museum. And my key people in the community are family historians. They're the ones who are preserving oral histories, preserving family stories, preserving photographs, which when I work with them to have those materials donated to our institution, we build an archive that sets up the future of Italian-American studies, a place where people can research Italian-American history. The objectives of our panel are relatively humble and simple. We want to state the overarching importance of genealogy to Italian-American studies and show some of the tools that are available. And I'm a historian or interested in history, and I'm always amazed at how the genealogists in many cases are using tools that we as historians can use and are really pioneering accessibility. A lot of the records that our first speaker are going to talk about pertain not only to family history but also to doing historical research. Secondly, we want to show how genealogy is not just putting together family trees and pedigrees of one particular family, but in some cases have evolved into wider projects documenting community history, following a village outward type of model. And we have an example for you today. And finally, we want to show how genealogy can really be used as a foundation for education, a platform for instilling an interest in Italian-American history in the Italian-American community, the public or the community manifestations of Italian-American genealogy and family history. And most importantly, I think the work of the three panelists is very important work that I've come to admire, and I think you'll learn a lot by hearing what they have to say today. Our first speaker is Dr. Jim Raguso, who's a specialist in genealogy and family history, particularly of Sicily, Hungary, and Slovakia. He lectures frequently on immigration records, as well as using the family history library at the Mormon Church in Salt Lake City. He's traced his ancestors back to the 1600s. He's a member of POINT and active in that organization, and is a retired NASA Kennedy Space Science Engineering Manager and presently an independent consultant for the Army. And he's going to talk to us about genealogical records that are available.
Thank you, Nick. Well, I'm glad to be here. I'm sorry we don't have a bigger crowd, which is part of the problem. It's hard getting Italians to do their genealogy. That's what I found. Anyway, I'm glad to be here. This is not my world with this Italian History Conference. I'm a NASA engineer former and trainer of astronauts and professor of business and engineering, and I work for the Army on tanks and trucks and all that. So I'm a little bit out of place here, but I'll find a way. My responsibility here for this session is to talk about organizations and resources in terms of what's available for those of us very interested in genealogy. Next, please. This conference is about Italian history, but what I think is terribly important are individual family histories, which is a subset of it. We all should be interested in that. My wife and I are doing this as a legacy for our children. We say we're going to spend all our money, and what we're going to do is give you a family history book. Okay? That's our goal. They weren't terribly happy about that. It's a little hard to sometimes get them interested in their genealogy, but we think that there will be a time when they do appreciate the work we've done for them. And we've already seen some use of it with our grandchildren. They have school assignments for autobiographies or small genealogies, and they come to us and we we have it all for them, so they get good grades. We have purposely found a time and have made the opportunity of doing this research. I was fortunate, I traveled all over the world for NASA and the university and the Army, and we couple our genealogy trips with places we go. So we have traveled extensively back to the old country, mine in Sicily and Hungary, and my wife's in Wales and Slovakia. We travel frequently with hired translators because of the areas we go into. Now, we're very fortunate with the Italian records. They're really very good. I've been doing a lot of Welsh research and Slovak research, and the records are horrible. It's far easier to trace women through their maiden names in Italian records than it is in the English records, which are awful in the Welsh records. So we're very fortunate. Some of you who have studied Italian history know about the Council of Trent, the reaction and response to the Reformation, where over a period of years, the Catholic Church sponsored meetings to resolve and react to the Reformation. One of the good things that came out of that was the requirement that priests and church officials keep records of baptisms, marriages, and births. Thank heavens for that. So since the mid-1500s, the churches have been doing that. And some of you may not know that the form of the Italian records really came out of the Spanish records that started in 1492 for the Inquisition. They wanted to know who was here and who was being born. So we need to be thankful for that. We also need to be thankful for those of us from southern Italy and Sicily for Napoleon's conquest, because he dictated that civil records would be kept by the local governments. And he not only did that, but he established standard forms to be used, so there's some uniformity. And the people initially revolted against that idea. They said, look, the church keeps records on us, why do we have to do this twice? We refused to do that, and the Napoleonic administrator said, well, we're going to solve that problem. If you die, your assets go to the state and not to your family. As simple as that. So people said, well, we think twice about this, we're going to register with the city as well. So we have parallel sets of records, very good records, kind of a complicated arrangement, sifting records back and forth, but nevertheless we benefit. I think that each of us has a responsibility to preserve our family history, especially the family story, which is a lot about what this conference is about. Those are perishable. Those are not in anyone's records. You know, what did Uncle Giuseppe do that was significant? What were the customs of the family? Where did you celebrate holidays? Where did you go for these celebrations? Those are not recorded anyplace. The birth, marriages, deaths, baptisms are. You can always get those, but it's the family stories that are important. In the case of my family, my father's job as the youngest was to go to the market in Chicago with the family truck and buy crates of grapes because they made their own wine in the basement. And my Aunt Frances's job was to stomp the grapes in the barrel. And she did okay until she was fired because they caught her sitting down on the job. That last part of the story. As far as organizations, there are a lot of organizations, but as far as I'm concerned, not that I'm a member, but Point, Pursuing Our Italian Names Together, and some of you are probably familiar with, is the leading organization. It's the network of family genealogists formed a little less than 20 years ago by Thomas Militello. And we have that many dues-paying members in 50 states and 18 countries, and here's the address. And I do have a handout, so everything I talk to you about as far as websites and book titles is in the handout, so you don't have to copy anything down. Before I go further, how many of you have done your own genealogies that either have started or finished that? Oh, got a half hand over there, a couple of half hands, and nothing over here. Okay, well, it's important. Next, please. As far as organizations, I don't want to shortchange some of them, but I think that Point is the greatest resource. And I brought some show and tell sorts of things here. Point publishes the quarterly journal. I've been doing this since the very beginning. It's an excellent publication. names, dates, stories, pictures. This one happens to be on a terribly important area of Italian orphans. It's a whole separate story, a very interesting story. So you have that. They have a national database, or I should say national, a database which is super. Here are all the members, their names, and what area are they working on. And it's sorted and done different ways. Unfortunately, I think they've stopped this, but this is a tremendous resource to find who else is working in your area that might be helpful. There are national conferences usually every second or third year. This year it was held in October in Los Angeles. We've also met in Las Vegas and St. Louis. And this is the website for Pointers. They have an organization, Pointers in Person, which is kind of the social arm, the local chapters. There are 28 chapters. Some of them are inactive, but they could be activated across the country. And PI is their email access. If the chat room, in effect, the Italian genealogy chat room. If you have questions about how to get records or find things, there's always someone to help. Now, there's another organization, the American Italian Heritage Association, and some of you are probably familiar with that. They seem to, they haven't been very helpful for me. I don't think they do much in the way of genealogy, and I think they're trying to start a museum, but they have links to genealogy sites, but not a lot of resources. Next. By far, the greatest source of genealogical records in the world is the Church of the Latter-day Saints, the LDS, the Mormon Church. How many of you have used their resources? Okay, a couple of you. Have any gone to Salt Lake City to the main library? All right, let me talk a little bit about that. First of all, they have a wonderful, wonderful Italian collection. And why do they have all these records? This is the greatest source of records in the world. The Italians come over here. The English come over here. Why do they do that? Because it's their basic belief that if you're a Mormon, you have to trace your ancestors back a number of generations. Your ancestors, whether they're Italian or not, are going to be rebaptized as Mormons. And a lot of the Roman Catholic Church had a problem with that. And they wouldn't let them have access to the records until the Mormons said, listen, we got a deal for you can't refuse. If you let us copy your records, we'll keep them in a granite mountain in Utah, and if you ever lose them, we'll send you copies of them. And think about all the people who won't be going through your records because we have them. And most of the Catholic churches have said that's a great idea. You don't have to be a member of the church. I'm not a Mormon to use the records. Everything is free. They put no pressure on you to join the church. We try to go to Salt Lake City once a year. It's like going to a candy store. There's so much there you don't know where to start. My wife and I lecture on how you do research in that library. So there's no cost and obligation unless you request films to your local family history center. So the library's in Salt Lake City, wonderful hours, basically open every day except Sunday. They have guides to Latin, Italian, how to do Italian research, how to read records, how to write letters to priests and mayors. It is unbelievable what they do have. And they have family history centers, 3,000 locations in the U.S. and worldwide. So there's one near you where you can order films, and they also have a stock of records and things you can use. My wife and I also lecture on Western and European history research, going to Europe because we've had so much experience in that in a number of different countries. Our main message is do not go to Europe to do research. Do not. Do all your research in this country. Everything is here. When we've gone there, I found everything was here. They had more stuff here than they have there. And besides, we went into town, the word spread that we were there looking for family. Family showed up, we partied for 3 days, couldn't get anything done. Couldn't get away from those people. You know, they're just too friendly. The food is too good. Do the research here, go over there when you know all the answers and have a good time. That's the bottom line for us. Major resources, Ellis Island Castle Gardens, wonderful websites. Some of the lectures here are on Italian immigration, and fortunately 80% of them came through New York City. 5.3 million Italians, the peak year 1907, most from southern Italy and Sicily, as you very well know. Okay. Let me tell you one other story. We're from an infamous town called Corleone. And it's a town of less than 15,000 people. I'm going back, and I want to tell you this story quickly. Less than 15,000 people. At one time, there were 100 Catholic churches in this community of 15,000 people. So where do you start with your efforts? I knew culturally that it's a mother church, and the Catholic rules say you must be baptized, married, and have your death service performed in the mother church. They cut from 100 to 1. So I wrote the priest, said, I want to see your records. They were all in the Mormon collection. Anyway, all right, got jumping back. This is the Ellis Island website. It's a good site. There are other help systems you can get to. Castle Garden was the immigration site before Ellis Island was constructed. They now have a website and some names. There are other places. It's important to realize, though, that there were other immigrants that entered the United States in other locations, like Canada, through Canada, Galveston, New Orleans, and there were in total more than 72 immigration locations you could come into this country. But fortunately for us, most came through Ellis Island. And you've seen those pictures, and hopefully you've been there. Cindy's List is a wonderful site, everything you can imagine. There are hundreds of links to Italian genealogy, and I have the /Italy.htm, which will get you to all those categories and everything else. There are, in the handout that I have, and those of you who came late, make sure you get one, all kinds of websites for Italian research. It is unbelievable now what you can find on the web. There's several magazines, and I brought a couple of Family History over here. And Ancestry magazine I didn't bring, but there's all kinds of stuff available, and periodically they'll do specials on Italian research. Next, a whole bunch of books. I only listed 4 here. These are my top 4, and I've got more in the listing in the handout. The first one is Sharon Bartello Carmack's book. I may not have brought it with me. Clearly, the Bible is the Trafford Cole book. If you could only afford one book, this is it. It needs to be updated, and I've been to several conferences with it. This is it. You could only afford one. The others are kind of in. This is a book by Coletta, and he's a book on immigrants ships to America. I won't show the rest of it. They're all up here if we have time to look at them. So anyway, these are kind of my 4 favorites. The Cole book is the best book to buy. So, what about your next steps? First of all, if you're just starting, you need to start with yourself. What do you know about yourself? When were you baptized? How much did you weigh? What time were you born? And I have my family book that I started. My wife's is 800 pages. Mine is 500 pages. I not only do the charts, every story is in there. All the cultural things are in there. The economic, social things. I'm interested in the context of when these people existed. So it's a very broad. I do vertical and horizontal. I do absolutely everything about everyone I know. So where did I start? I started with myself. Where was I born? How much did I weigh, etc. Branched out to my family and my relatives. We lived down here in Florida, and my Chicago relatives came in 1976 when my parents moved, sat down at the table and said, I've been hearing all these stories all my life. I can't relate all these people. Tell me about these people. So my uncle, who had a tremendous memory, and my aunt sat down. They straightened everything out for me, got me on the right track. Importantly, they told me where my ancestors came from. If you're doing research, you need to know the village or town that they came from. If they came from a big city, Rome, Naples, Palermo, you need to know the section of the city or the church. The records are overwhelming. You need to get that clue. And you need to capture the family stories, tape recorder, however you do it. Those are things, and I've lost all those aunts and uncles are gone. My parents are gone, my grandparents are gone. I am the repository for family stories now, because they're all gone. Buy or obtain a computer program. I use Family Tree Maker. It's the #1 seller, about $35. Laura's using it. She has it here. The Mormon Church has a personal ancestral file, PAF, which is basically free. It's kind of the standard for all their record keeping. Join point, it's a nominal charge. Join a local chapter. Begin your record searches, Ellis Island, Castle Garden, other ports. The chances are good your ancestors came from those locations. My order of search for any records is marriage, birth, and death. The marriage records are usually more complete, especially the Italian records. And I was telling someone there's an area that most Italian genealogists don't know about, and that's called oligati. And those are all the collected records for the grandparents and parents that go with the wedding. And that's another separate story. But the marriage records are more complete. The birth records are usually accurate because of the time of the event. The death records are usually wrong. Someone goes in there and says, I think he was born here this time and died, I think, yesterday. You know, we just found it. Anyway, I'm being facetious. Don't put off researching your family history. Those stories are disappearing. They're going. Get the oldest relative first. Start with them. They usually like to talk to you. Preserve what they know. And that's the end of my presentation. And we're not going to have questions and answers, so everyone gets their fair share. And thank you.
From New York City, and what he's going to talk about is how family history and genealogy begins at the family level, but in many ways, and has in his case, expanded to the community level. Mr. Toglia is a native of Brooklyn, New York, who has taught French, Spanish, and Italian in the New York City public schools for 30 years. His research focused initially on immigrants from the town of Calitri, and he is the author of a forthcoming book, which is a compilation of family stories titled They Came by Ship, The Stories of the Calitrani Immigrants in America.
Thank you, everybody. Just want to show you, this is basically our collection, which will go into a book. And I'm going to tell you basically how I got started on this. I got interested, discuss how I got interested in the history of the Calatrani people, also the importance of knowing surnames that are typical from a particular town in Italy. And luckily in Italy, the people stayed basically within their own geographic area in their towns, and so they intermarried or they married people from the town. And usually in southern Italy, the surnames just kept repeating. And also, eventually I went out and I gathered information from my fellow paesani so that I was able to get their stories. So let me just introduce the town of Calitri. This is where my ancestors came from. I had always heard of Calitri, and I made my first trip there in 1972. And from all the wonderful things I heard about it from my parents and the paesani, I expected to see paradise. So when I landed, got off the train, I was totally shocked to see such an ancient town, because I was expecting, something that was going to knock me off my feet. My first reaction, being a young 20-year-old, I said to myself, gee, I'm from New York. I said, they got to knock this down. Towns. This is where Calitri is located, on the Ovando River. It's about, I guess, 80 miles east of Naples. And, they started coming over to the New World, to America, in the 1890s, more or less. They started in 1888 or so. So it's located in southern Italy, south central Italy. And inside that circle, which we're using as our logo, are the towns that the Calatrani settled in the United States. And there weren't that many, and I was kind of lucky that they didn't spread all over the country. Basically, they were in Westchester County, New York City area, Montclair, New Jersey, Paterson, Newark, Jersey City, Bayonne in New Jersey. Upstate, they were in Batavia. In Connecticut, they were in 3 communities, Hartford, Stamford, Bridgeport, and also Torrington. And in Pennsylvania, they were primarily in Dunmore, which was right next door to Scranton. Show me the next slide. Well, I'm going to discuss these things. First of all, I became interested in the history of Calitri when my father died in 19 1980, I realized I knew very little of his life. I knew more about my mother's family because she was the storyteller. So I knew more about the Cadella family, how they came over, that they settled in Newark. But I knew very little about my father, and I never thought to ask him. Because, and I never thought, what did you do, why did you come over, etc. And so when he died, I said, wow, I know very little about my father. So I wrote to my aunt in Italy. She was the oldest member there in Calitri, and I said, can you tell me some of the family stories? And she was able to send me her recollections. And then I started tracing my family tree, and this was before the internet era. And basically, I would write to the archives. First, I wrote to Calitri, and they said, well, if you want earlier records, you got to write to Avellino, which was the provincial capital. So it was this back and forth between Italy and my home, getting all this information because I was tracing my family tree. And I was talking with other relatives and other paisani, so they let the word out that Mario had family trees if you want to know anything. And I would get various letters or phone calls. I know one cousin called me from New Jersey, and she said, "Gee, we heard that Bishop Bevilacqua was made the cardinal in Philadelphia, and his mother's from Calitri, and her last name was Cadella, and we're Cadellas, are we related?" And I knew that we weren't related to that family. And other people, like one time I got a phone call from upstate New York from a person I never knew existed, and it turned out he was my third cousin, and he wanted to know about another lineage, the Montanillo family, and so I was able to provide him with family trees. Actually, he forced me to look into a certain book that I had from an aunt on the history of Calitri, and I was able to give him some background on the town of Calitri. In the meantime, the internet came, and I got myself a computer, and I had learned about the Family History Center, so I was doing research there, and I came upon a great-great-great-grandmother whose last name was Fastigi, and I met Marlene Dunham from Seattle. She was online, and she was, her mother was a Fastigi, and she was doing that family line. So, and she had started a family newsletter. She suddenly became interested in her family tree because her mother had her grandfather's birth certificate on the living room wall, and she just became curious. She said, one day I suddenly said, I have to know. And I think a lot of people feel like that, all of a sudden they wake up and they say, gee, where's our family history? So she came online, I met her, and then she sent me her family newsletter, which was called the Fastigi Family File. And she also started meeting other people on the internet, thank God for the internet. And she met other Calatrani, other descendants from Calitri, and they suggested to her that she create a website. So she started the Calitrian Connections. Their address is www.calitri.org, and it became a repository for all things that were Calatrani. In the meantime, I had met someone from Boston online who was connected to this person, this young man in Arizona, Jason Gervais, and he was doing research at the Family History Center. He had a database of 3,000 names from Calitri, which proved valuable to me later. And he started a web list so that people could start interacting and talking about Calitri. And through interacting with other people online, they wanted to meet me, and I would go out and I would meet them, and they would show me actually memorabilia that they had from way back in the early 1900s that somehow they just did not want to part with. They had souvenir booklets, they had photographs, they had flyers, and I also discovered, when my mother passed away, I discovered that she had a newspaper that the Calatrani people put out from